There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. Third chapter, Ecclesiastes, Old Testament. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Diplomatic Corps, as the President of the Board of Trustees of the Batthyány Foundation, I feel it really a great privilege to greet you tonight within the historic walls of this wonderful building, the Lónyai 60 Villa. This building serves as the headquarters building of the Batthyány Foundation, that serves as the headquarters building of our think tank, Danube Institute, the host of this event. Let me greet very warmly our special guest tonight, Dr. Balázs Orbán, President of the Board of Trustees of the Matthias Corvinus Collegium and the Political Director of the Prime Minister of Hungary. In 2010, some 14 years ago, when we won the elections, we witnessed not only a change of government, a change of the political climate, but we witnessed that the Hungarian conservative political innovation marched far away ahead of the Hungarian conservative philosophical innovation. To fill in this gap, we started a new systematic project to build on the foundations of the existing conservative intellectual framework, a new superstructure. Several foundations, associations, clubs, research centers, and think tanks were founded. That was the period when, in 2013, we, the Batthyány Foundation, established our think tank, the Danube Institute, to fulfill the mission of the study of conservatism to shape a new, modern, national conservative framework. We established our media world, a lot of journals, and I was the lucky guy who established our journal, the Hungarian Conservative, the English language forum to disseminate the key messages of the Hungarian conservative thought. I'm very proud of it, both of the journal and its contents, the Hungarian conservative thought. And now we have a bustling conservative political and intellectual life with thousands of young intellectuals who form a wide and deep background for the Hungarian conservative politics. One of the symbolic figures of this new generation is sitting next to us. Balázs Orbán is not only one of the emblematic figures of this new generation, but one of the engines behind them, who, as the political director of the Prime Minister, is one of the masterminds of the Hungarian conservative revival. On our way, we suddenly found a milestone, not a keystone, only a milestone on our way. This milestone is going to be the new English language book of Balázs Orbán. There's an inscription on this milestone which says that this is the point where the Hungarian conservative philosophical innovation catches up with the Hungarian conservative political innovation. We finally filled in the gap. So this book signals a milestone and can be considered as a point where and when the philosophical innovation catches up with the political innovation. This book is a kind of codification of the basic principles of a conservative philosophical or political philosophical innovation based on the interests of a sovereign European EU member country. And this framework is a real alternative of the prevailing liberal or progressive political system. So from this point, the political and philosophical innovations march alongside with each other along the road, which hopefully leads to the paradise and to a prosperous and peaceful European Union, which is based on the alliance of strong and sovereign nation states. No, I have got nothing else left, just to open the floor for the discussion and ask Carlos to take the floor. And thank you for coming, ladies and gentlemen. It was quite a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce the man of the hour, Mr. Balázs Orbán. He is, well, introductions were already mostly covered, but once again, he is, among other things, the political director of the Prime Minister of Hungary, chairman of the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, and the author of The Hungarian Way of Strategy, and more recently, the Hussar Cut, The Hungarian Strategy for Connectivity, which he will discuss presently. Balázs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, if I may call at least some of you that way. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. It's actually always a privilege to stand at this stage surrounded by this wonderful scenery, which actually gives you a hint about Hungarian history and the purpose of being Hungarian. As so you know, these medieval walls, which were used to protect the Hungarian kingdom in medieval period of time against many of the enemies, and then this building was, and the foundation which is hosting us right now was named after the first Prime Minister of Hungary, who was actually executed by defending and establishing the independent Hungarian state and protecting the Hungarian sovereignty. And then after we regained sovereignty in the latest decades of the 20th century, then Batthyány Lajos Foundation was established. Then it was said Danube Institute was put together, and the general purpose of the Danube Institute is to connect people from all over the Western Hemisphere and bring them to Hungary and play a very important role in Hungarian conservative thinking and in general formulating the conservative mindset for the new era in the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere. So I'm extremely grateful to be here, and I'm extremely grateful that they are interested in my book. Thank you very much for everything who made it possible to publish it. Thank you very much for the wonderful translation. Thank you very much for the wonderful blurbs, which was provided by many important foreign academic persons and think tank persons and politicians and so on. I'm extremely proud of these blurbs. Now, the organizers asked me to give a short summary about the book. I try to make it very short to leave some space for discussion. Actually, the most complicated part of writing this book was the title, because it took me like 2 months to figure out what should be the best title. But probably this is the part where I'm most pleased, because I think it fits perfectly. The original idea was that I should formulate a title as something linked to the idea of connectivity. And then I figured out it's not working, because connectivity has a scientific literature also in the Anglo-Saxon sphere, but in many other spheres as well. But in Hungarian, it sounds a bit ridiculous, because there is no such word in academia as connectivity. So if you say connectivity, you cannot translate it into Hungarian, at least from an academic point of view. People immediately think about, connecting people to people in a very personal matter. So it's not part of the political language, the word. Then I was stuck for many time by the idea of Keystone State, which is very frequently used by the gentlemen who are also present here in this room. But then I realized that the Hungarian translation of the word keystone, it's also not perfect, because immediately everybody is thinking about architecture or terms, not political terms. In English, it fits perfect and it works perfectly, but unfortunately not in Hungarian. And then I realized that it's not the strategy actually what should be described as a title, but the maneuver, so the moving, but the direction of moving, and I should be able to find an analogy to explain this moving. And then that was the time when the Hussar Cut came. The idea of Hussar Cut came into my mind and immediately affected my brain, and it was all over. So that was the moment when it was decided that the title will be Hussar Cut. Hussars are Hungarian light cavalry, as you probably, many of you know. And actually, it's a military innovation. It's a Hungarian military innovation. Hussar cavalries were established after it was innovated in Hungary in many places all over the Western world, also in the United States of America, but also France, also Germany, also Austria, and many other places. And their winning strategy was the Hussar Cut, which is, according to the traditional English translation, it would be some kind of masterstroke. So it's a decisive, brave, unexpected, a bit risky move or maneuver which turns the outcome of the battle from upside down and provides a winning opportunity for the Hussars and for the Hungarians, and is leaving the enemy on the battlefield as lost and gone. So this is what Hussar Cut means, and it really has a deep, I would say, intellectual meaning and a deep linguistic meaning in Hungarian literature. And I hope that it will be also widely covered in the international media in English as well. I was actually very proud that when Ivan Krastev wrote about, after publishing this book, wrote about what the Hungarian Prime Minister did in the European Council Summit in the Financial Times. He also used the term Hussar Cut immediately, that it was kind of a Hussar Cut maneuver from the Hungarian Prime Minister, what he did in December in the Council meeting. So the word immediately started to operating independently from the author, and I'm very proud of it. The book itself has three important elements. I would like to briefly talk about all three elements. The first, the word order. Probably this is the most complex, the most complicated part, and probably this is where we have the most different way of understanding, because we are coming from different parts of the world. And it's very natural, it's very understandable. This is how, from a Hungarian point of view, this is how, from a Budapest-based conservative thinking point of view, the word order looks like. And if you cover all these international papers and journals, you see a kind of a confusion. Like you see the headlines are very divided. Some of them are saying that the most important question of our time is related to gender. Some of them are saying that it's related to migration. Some of them are saying that it's related some kind of proxy war or military type of things. Some are saying that the UFOs will so unidentified objects will be the decisive forces of the 21st century. So the word is a bit the situation is a bit undecided, which is going to be the most important phenomena or most important social phenomena of the upcoming debates. But we Hungarians do think, and many of the Hungarians, obviously not everybody, but many of the Hungarians, we do think that the biggest question at the global stage of the upcoming decades will be about the changing world order and the collapse of the post-Cold War world order. This is not something which we can affect. This is not something which we can have a saying, because we are too small to have a saying on that. But this is, for us Hungarians, it's like a natural phenomenon, like the sun is rising. And the question what you have to pose to yourself is, what do you do with that? The sun is rising or it's going down, whether you like it or not. It's not up to you to decide. It's up to you to have an impact on that. your job is to figure out how to deal with them, how to deal with that, and how to react on that as a natural phenomenon. Sun is coming up. One option is that you stay in your bed and you are not moving. The other option is you wake up, you wash your teeth, and you go to work. This is the point which is on you. And in the book, I try to describe in a very detailed way how this world order looks like, because it's not just about was looking like the old world order. And my way of understanding it is that the old world order was based on the idea of globalization. And the globalization there was a driving force behind globalization, an ideology behind globalization, and it's still called, and it was called neoliberalism. So it was a neoliberalism, ideologically driven globalization model, what we had after the post-war period of time, which is meaning that it's a way of how we manage international trade. It's a way of what we think about good governance. It's a way of how we think about the role of an individual in the society. So it's a complex ideology, not just about trade, not just about state-to-state relations. It's a complex ideology, neoliberalism, and the entire world order with the international organizations, with the strategies with the strategies of the big powers were dominated by this ideological view. Many times we are referring to Francis Fukuyama as somebody who's provided the social framework for that. Very well known, his statement about end of history and the spread of liberal democracy as a complex ideology which will overtake everywhere and turn the world upside down. And this original strategy of this post-Cold War world order was that it will be led by Western powers. So Western powers will be in lead and will remain in lead. But in the meantime, this complex system of globalization and international organizations will lift up other places of the world economically and by the living standards. And these lifted parts of the world will connect and at the end of the day will merge with the Western part of the world. So the West will be able to preserve the complex political, constitutional, philosophical, and economical narrative and background of this post-world order. This was the strategy. This was the time how we lived our. This was the mindset how we lived our life. But what happened in just 2 decades' time? Actually, everybody, the entire world, lost confidence in this neoliberal way of seeing the world and the strategy which was the driving force behind this old type of world order. It's in the academia and in the think tank world, it's widely discussed why it happened and what was the most important factor. I don't want to make a judgment on that. Some of them are saying that it's driven by economy, that BRICS countries economically became stronger, and the balance there is now balance between the Western powers and the BRICS countries, which are not part of the Western community. Some of them are saying that internal Western divisions were the most decisive factors. Brexit, Donald Trump, new way of republicanism in the United States. Some of them are saying that it was a kind of a break in the World Trade Organization system. Some of them are saying that ideologically religious-based conflict became so important than it was never ever expected. So the book is not saying anything about about what was the decisive factor. It just collects all the factors and brings us to the conclusion that something happened and something is different. So some new kind of world order was formulated, and if this new kind of world order is formulated, it requires a new strategy from the big powers as well, and obviously it requires an adaptation process for Hungary to understand how the world looks like around us and how we can find our way to get more successful. This is one element. I did choose one element because probably this is the most factual based change. How now the world economy, according to, I think it's an IMF data and probably an economist-based chart, how the new world order looks like. If you compare it with how the world order and how the world economy looked like in the 90s, you get a completely different picture. And it's not just about that we have now China and United States, but it's about the rest of the world, how the balance between them, how mid powers emerged, and how the balance between them changed. So something, my statement is something changed, is that something changed. And this is how US-China relationship looked like under the New World Order. You see all nice pictures, nice, drawings, nice elements, politicians talking to each other, friendly headlines, like the panda bear, which is a nice and sweet animal, and the bald eagle, which is a very also a very nice and domesticated animal, and they find their way together. This was how the relationship, according to international mainstream journals, were described by the two big powers of the world. And now, what we have. This is how it changed. I know it's a joke, but I think this kind of visualization, it is strengthening my argument that something has changed. And it's very visible. Probably if you are following international press on a daily basis, you can see the change because you are in the middle of the change. But if you compare how this situation and how the description of the world order looks like 30 years ago based on the same relationship, and now you see how it looks like now, it's a completely different world. You know, the panda bear is not anymore there. It's mainly a dragon. Or if a panda bear, then it's also a bit scary. And the bald eagle is also quite upset about something. And it seems that the confrontation between the two of them, it's inevitable. So this is how the description of the word changed, whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, whether we have a positive affiliation towards it or not. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying that this is the reality. This is how the perception about the world order changed. And here are some quotes from all over the world. From America, from China, from Europe, and from some intellectuals. And you see in all these quotes, which were done since 2018, you see that all these quotes are somehow referring to the fact that the world order is changing, so new strategies are emerging and giving you a hint about how the new strategy would look like. You see the words of decoupling, de-risking, bloc formation, multipolar world order, confrontation, monogamous, I didn't know that this kind of word exists in English, but monogamous geopolitical relationship, and also the word or the end of history type of interpretation from the academic world from Francis Fukuyama. A new perspective emerged about that as well. Let's put it that way. And from the scientific literature part of it, it's all used by the book. This is what everybody is talking about. And everybody is trying to give a solution, trying to interpret the situation obviously from its own point of view, and describing and putting together strategies, identifying breaking points, and so on and so on. This is what the international discussion is about, and this is the most decisive issue of contemporary politics. Whether we like it or not, whether there is a positive affiliation on our side towards it or not. So this is how the world looks like, and then we have to identify, if we want to take seriously strategy building, we have to identify who we are. And we Hungarians are a landlocked country in the middle of Europe, but culturally an island, as it is many times said by also directly by the Prime Minister. We don't have our natural resources. We don't have our serious military. We don't have our serious internal market. Just 10 million people. 10 million people in the middle of Europe with this culturally East and West background. And how we could be successful in the last decades, especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we built up a Hungarian economy which is open, which is using the geographical advantages of the country, the cultural advantages of the country. The country itself is very much export-driven. Actually, it's the most export-driven country on earth. And our idea is that we have to be able to use the talent of the Hungarians and the ambition of the Hungarians. Look on the number of Nobel Prize winners and look on the number of Olympic medals winners. So our passion, our knowledge, our ambition, our capability to build up a country which is successful, based on the idea that if you come here to Hungary and make business with Hungarians, you produce something, you can sell it to the entire world, and it's worth to do it because you will make also business, and the Hungarians will also collect some kind of knowledge and make some business about that. This is how Hungary looks like if you step a bit further from that. And obviously, the word, there is a Hungarian song, a lyric of the Hungarian song, the news is all about you, the press is full with you. So we actually make singings about what you experience on a daily basis. So this is why we think that to survive this era and this changing world order, and provide a narrative, provide a strategy, provide an opportunity for everybody, we have to be visible. We cannot be only adaptive. We have to show that this country is different, this country is unique, this country is something which is worth to visit, which is worth to spend time, which is worth to make business. So if the press is full of us and the news is all about us, it's not just a coincidence. It's not just that we are doing something bad, but it's actually the opposite. We are doing something good because the news is all about, and it provides us a kind of an importance in this changing world order. Why and how at the end of this we can be a new keystone state of this new world order, which I don't want to go into the details. What does it mean? And I would be very curious about hearing the opinion of the gentleman and Mr. Roa about this. But I think there is an opportunity that through this political strategy and way of understanding of the world order, we could be able to build up a country which is a keystone state of the new world order. Why? I would just mention you three examples or three proofs. One is that the Hungarian tribes came from the east and now part of the west. It's a cultural issue. Probably culture is the most soft issue. It's very hard to detect what does it mean in the present, but in the future. But we Hungarians are convinced that it means something. If we go to Korea, the Koreans think, and we do think as well, that we are relatives, which is, from the first side, probably it's a surprise, but this is how the two nations looks on each other. Because the Hungarian people, more than 1,100 years ago, moved from the West in the middle of a migration movement, occupied the land, became Christians and integrated into the European system, but never left behind their Eastern openness in a cultural terms. And now, in this changing world order, when the question is who is able to mitigate and who is able to bridge and who is able to talk on both sides, I think this can be a decisive factor for Hungary. The second one is geography, and just one map from Middle East period of time. If you look on the trade routes, the land trade routes between East and West, the land trade routes, all of them are going through Hungary, traditionally, whether we like it or not. In the Hungarian history, sometimes we feel that this kind of being in the middle of a civilizational clash point, it's a disadvantage. But if you think it through and think about the current situation, now it's a civilizational and economic and geographic and geopolitical advantage point in the middle of the trade routes. If there is trade, if there is economic activity, if there is cultural activity, if there is political activity between East and West, it must go through Hungary. So this is something we also can build on. And the third one, or the third proof why this is probably a perfect, it could be a perfect strategy for Hungary. As I was describing you, Hungary is nowadays also a small, export-oriented economy, but it's also one of the most complex economies on the earth. Now, according to the Harvard Index, we are the 11th most complex economy in earth. So this is important because you can find here everything. These signs are just different branches or different side legs of the industries. You can find here everything. So if you want to connect to something, some elements of the industry, of some elements of the economy, you will definitely find a company, definitely find a know-how, definitely find the partners here in Hungary. This also can be a decisive factor on a field of economy in this changing world order. And why connectivity and why this used in a Hungarian framework as a breakthrough strategy for us, or at least this is my suggestion and this is my recommendation for the political elite of Hungary. On the left side, you can see in this changing world order the threats, which are not from an American point of view, not from a Chinese point of view, not from a German point of view, not from a Saudi Arabia point of view, but from a Hungarian point of view, the threat of this changing world order, which I try to describe in the book as a bloc formation world order, not anymore a world order based on globalization, but based on bloc formation, where if you belong to one group, you have to be loyal to that group, you have to cut ties with the other group members. You can only build political, military, economic, cultural, and so on connections with your fellow bloc members. And outside the bloc, communication, business, political connection making, and other type of cooperations are prohibited. And this bloc formation logic is something which is emerging. It's getting more and more popular. As you see in the quotes, more and more leaders are talking about this. This is probably a response to the shift of balance inside the great power rivalry. And this is why it is causing a serious threat towards us. Because if you are part of the bloc, it means that you can have only one connection. So it is rising your level of dependency. From a Hungarian point of view, the more connections you have towards the more directions, the more sovereign you are, because the more opportunities you have to choose. So one threat of this bloc formation logic is the reinforcement of the existing dependencies, and our strategy should be about offsetting unilateral dependencies. So just building them down or destroying them, or in all channels, in the field of energy, in the field of economy, in the field of even political connections, in the field of many industrial sectors, offsetting unilateral dependencies. And it's extremely important since you have an export-oriented economy, because if something happens in the world, it immediately affects Hungarian economy. So currently the Hungarian economic numbers in this 3 months period of time are not as good as they should be, because in the Red Sea, the Houthis attacking the ships, and it affects the global line of a chain of commerce, and it affects the productivity of the Hungarian companies. So these global world order disorders and turbulences are immediately affecting the Hungarian economy. And the more one-legged you are, the more dependent on one industry, on one connection, on one way of understanding you are. If you are export-oriented, the less sovereign you are. So this is the second point. Sovereignty is not just about economy, it's about politics, it's about culture, it's about deciding your own rules. So if this world order is turning towards a more bloc formation logic, it obviously means for Hungary a less sovereign position, less maneuvering space. And if we are able to build up a strategy which is focusing on connectivity, then we will be able to preserve our sovereignty. The third one is the economy. If you have just one chance, one bloc, one logic, then it will cause economic decline. And the fourth one, if you have bloc formation, if you have civilizational confrontations, if you have wars in the neighborhood which are blocking and canceling the original trade routes, then you are remaining a peripheria. Being a peripheria, thank you very much, we tried it many times in history, we don't want to try it anymore. We want to be a keystone state, and yeah, you have to change the two sides, because conflict spillover is the opposite of preserving internal and external security. So it obviously has not only an economic, a political, and a sovereignty-based element, but also a security-based element. And at the end of the book, because we Hungarians, we don't like to adapt automatically, so in an autopilot mode, any strategies which are coming from outside. So even if we accept the idea of connectivity, which was probably put together by the Anglo-Saxon scientific literature, we modify it a little bit and turn it into a Hungarian model. So it's definitely not a connectivity strategy, what you can see other places of the world, but uniquely only works for Hungary. And these are the 12 elements which I was able to put together. I just want to refer on some elements, and I want to pass the floor to the roundtable discussion. So connectivity does not mean that you have to give up your own values, but the opposite, because connectivity is working if you are what you are who you are. So if you engage in international dialogues with everything what represents you, with all the values. This makes you no controversial. It actually provides you more opportunities because your partners are able to identify your motives and the way of understanding of you in a more simple way than if you try to pretend that you are similar than others. You have to be proud of your own value system, and you have to get engaged in the value system. And then the difference is, it's an opposition of liberal interpretation of world order and international politics, because according to the liberal interpretation of international politics, you have to first accept liberal values, and then on that basis, you are able to engage in international dialogues. But our way of understanding, it's completely different. You first identify your own values, and you use them as pillars of international cooperation. And to have a more trustworthy, stable relationship, it's easy, even if the value system of the two actors at first seems to be very, very distant from each other. Obviously, building coalitions, so the Hungarian foreign policy should build on not having more enemies, but the opposite, having more friends. Coalition building in the region, coalition building in Europe, coalition building worldwide. This is an important factor. It's not always easy, and especially if there is a clash between the liberal values and the Hungarian value system. It's very complicated, but you don't have to give up. You just have to push it further. Investment, national champions, sectors as breakthrough point, infrastructure as such. It's very important. Regional impact. If you are a small country and you want to make yourself interesting for the rest of the world, you have to be a regional player. You have to play a decisive role in formulating the region. And you have to also be able to represent the region, the voice of the region in the international arena as well. This is actually, according to my understanding, what we are doing in connection with the war, for example, because if you look on the public opinion polls, what those people who are living inside the Carpathian Basin, the majority of the people think about the war. It doesn't matter whether they speak Slovakian, whether they speak Serbian, whether they speak Romanian, whether they speak Hungarian, whether they speak Austrian or German. The majority of those people who are living here, they see a war as not an opportunity to gain something geopolitically or to destroy a superpower or whatever, but they see it as a threat. And the sooner we stop the war, it's better for everybody. And this is not a Hungarian issue, although it's only represented probably on the governmental level by Hungary. Now Slovakia is getting closer. But if you dig down, if you go into the details, you see that the entire region and those people who are coming from different ethnic minorities, ethnic backgrounds, but still living here, their mindset is very similar on that. This is what it means that you have to be able to think regionally, to represent the region, and also to think about the region economically. Make your country a meeting point. Make Danube Institute a meeting point. We talked about it. Security is also important. So we are very proud that since 2 or 3 years, now, finally, we are able to fulfill our NATO requirements. 2% of the GDP, more than 2% of the GDP has to go to security. Public safety is the 20th safety country on earth, probably the most safe country, Hungary, in Europe, especially for some minorities, for the Jewish minority and for the conservative minority. They also have a chance to find a safe spot here in Budapest, and they are not threatened, cancelled, or anything else. And obviously, the last 2 points are about the usual things, what we realists or conservative thinkers we like to highlight. Always that a foreign policy should not be based on ideology, but rather should be based on national interest. This is how you can describe the world, and you can build up a secure world order from a national conservative point of view, and as an essential for that, supporting peace and stability in the region, and not looking for further confrontations in your neighborhood where you can really have an effect. This is also a very important and the last point of this strategy, which can be described, which can be read and seen in the book, and everything can be described very freely in the upcoming half an hour or 40 minutes. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Balázs, for that very insightful presentation. Now we move on to the lovely panel discussion. So, gentlemen, take your seats, and I'll introduce you. Balázs, of course. We also have Mr. Rod Dreyer, a visiting fellow here at the Danube Institute and the director of the Institute's Network Project. And, of course, Professor Patrick Deneen, the prominent American conservative political philosopher. Now then, let me take my seat here. Test. All right, good. Right, let's get right into it then. Balázs, you talk very much so in your book about connectivity and, of course, Keystone State. For the benefit of the audience who don't know, this term is a particular attachment to me. It was first conceived in 2015 by Professor Nicholas Gvozdev of the U.S. Naval War College, former editor of the National Interest, then expanded by Professor Damjan Krnjević at AD University for National Interest, and then I came along and added to it, and as Balázs notes so graciously in his book, applied to the Hungarian context. And I think I may have been the first one to bring it to your attention. Sure. But you went further than it, because Nick, Damjan, and I focused on the geostrategic and economic context, whereas you added this whole cultural dimension that we did not address. Most notably in the book, you note how Christianity plays the role of the cultural connector to Europe for the better part of the past 2,000 years. It's the transnational glue, so to speak, that keeps the entire West together. So the first provocative question is, if this is the role of Christianity in keeping the West, Europe together, can Europe and the West remain unified without this connective element?
Thank you very much. It's a very good question, and it's true that the idea came from the distinguished gentlemen, and I try to add some elements to it. And when I first started to discussion with some members of the political elite of Hungary, like church leaders, think tank leaders, and prominent economic figures, and so on, the idea of the book, then we started to talk with the Catholic priest about this. And that was a time when I realized, I don't know who said it, probably me, but he was talking about the exact same thing, that actually Christianity for the West is the only effective connectivity project which we experienced in the history, because it's a transnational, I'm not saying ideology, but transnational way of thinking, which is a universal value system and is able to connect people from United States to Sweden, from Russia to Hungary, and this is. And Christianity was not just used in European history by religious purposes, but it was a driving force behind doing politics, actually doing politics in the medieval period of time, where many leaders were nationalists in many sense, and how they made connections they made friendships, they became relatives to each other, they became family members based on Christianity, based on the same moral system. They created a kind of capitalism, so even an economic ecosystem based on Christian morality. So actually, I do realize that Christianity itself, it's not something which is dividing the West, but it's something which is traditionally uniting the West. And the problem of the contemporary West is that it's trying, by the liberal forces, and it's done very strategically, that they're trying to get rid of Christianity and trying to kick this out from the public sphere and replace it with something. But no one knows what this something means. And actually, this is the reason why inside the West, these type of communication between nations and between political elites became way more hard as it was, because the glue is, as it was described by you, the glue disappeared. And I think the priest whom I talked to was surprised at the beginning, and probably he was thinking in a different dimension, but I like the idea, and I try to keep it. And the question is, your question is, how effective it is in this changing world order, where the West is more post-Christian than Christian. I think from a small country point of view, it's very effective. It's very effective. You just have to understand that you have no chance to winning the entire society, only parts of it. But for a small country like Hungary, this is much better than we could ever get. What I'm talking about. Now, as you've seen, the news is all about us. We are in the headlines in the United States of America. It does not mean that everybody loves us in the United States of America. Half of United States of America, led by the liberal administration and the Democratic Party, how should I say it? Dislike Hungary. Probably this is a polite way of doing it. But the other half of America, the conservative Christian part of America, not just knows where Hungary is and what the Hungarians are doing, which actually never been the case since probably Lajos Kossuth, whose statue is in the Capitol here. But American elites never had any idea what to think about Hungary before. But now, half of United States political elite not just knows where Hungary is and what Hungary is doing, but uses Hungary as a role model for future conservative leadership. Obviously, for us Hungarians, we know that, like Americans are the elephants, we are the mouses, so an elephant cannot learn from the mouse, but just the other way around. But this is what we experience on a daily basis through journals, through media, and through everything. So from my point of view, or from, I think, my country's point of view, this connectivity strategy, where we use the conservative Christian values of families, values of sovereignty, values of Christianity, and so on, it is opening our country up in the big power competition. It's polarizing, obviously. We're losing some segments. We're losing some elements. But what we're gaining, something I think more important. And we are very actively trying to build on that. And I think it's working perfectly. So I have hope on the Hungarian part that it's a very reasonable strategy, even in a post-Christian world order. But I don't have such a straightforward answer if you ask me about the future, the general future of the post-Christian West.
Do you want to go ahead first, Patrick? In 2021, a Harvard anthropologist named Joseph Henrich published a really interesting book called The Weirdest People in the World. And his argument, again, an anthropologist, is that the West itself is such a far outlier on world culture in any number of ways, but mostly psychologically. And he goes on to explain how that came about. And he concludes it's because of Christianity, but not just Christianity, Latin Christianity. Specifically, what the leaders of what is now the Catholic Church, or the Christian Church in the West, the role they played in the early medieval period in setting down rules for how families should be governed, how society should be governed, because the Roman Empire had collapsed in the West. And so it fell to the church to govern things. Henrik, from an anthropological point of view, talks about how this set into motion the structures that made the West the West. So fast forward to the American Revolution. One of our founding fathers in the U.S., in one of his often quoted letter, speaking of the relationship between religion and the state, he said our Constitution, the American Constitution, was made for a moral and religious people. It is not sufficient to govern any other. And what he meant by that was, if we are going to have freedom of the sort that is guaranteed by this liberal constitution, classically liberal constitution, then it presupposes a shared religious belief and self-restraint. I think if you look to see what has happened to the US and to Europe in the 21st century, you see the crisis of post-Christianity. You see what happens when people no longer see the story of the Bible as their story, or not only as their story, but our story in the West. And it's not pretty. I mean, we see that the leaders of Western institutions, particularly political and economic institutions and academia, the one thing they seem to share in common is an opposition to, and perhaps even a hatred of, normative Christianity. So I don't see this sort of idea that we're moving past the Christian age into an era of secular, sweet reason. It's clearly not worked out, and it's not going to work out. This is one of the things that people who come to Hungary, Americans, really love about this country. They don't praise the Christianity necessarily, but they praise its normality. Just last night, I met an American professor from Los Angeles, and he used the word I hear from so many Americans who visit. It's so normal here. It is. And it's normal in large part because the leadership in this country and its institutions have not rejected Christianity. If you come to Hungary expecting to see churches filled, you're not going to see it, sadly. But you still have a leadership here that is not ashamed to be Christian and to affirm Christianity in a very tolerant way, but in a certain way as the basis of their society. And they have taken measures to enforce that. Now, the concern I have, though, is that leaders of churches, Protestant and Catholic and otherwise, as well as families, if they don't step up and create meaning and embrace the faith and live the faith out in a tangible way and pass it on to their kids, then all the work that Prime Minister Orbán and the government is doing to build a structure of defense around the faith, it's not going to mean anything. It's not going to last. The faith has to be reborn in an integral and a visceral way in the everyday lives of Hungarians and Europeans and Americans, or it will not be able to withstand the forces from radical consumerism, radical individualism, a sort of capitalism that depends on isolating everyone and cutting them off from their past, and so on and so forth. Either the West will rediscover in a real way its Christianity, or it will dissolve. I don't see any other middle way.
I was privileged to read an early version, or at least a little short version of this book, and to offer an endorsement. And having now read the entire book, I offered the endorsement without reading the whole book, which is always a little bit of a danger. In fact, I'd like to go back and rewrite the endorsement because I can't speak highly enough about this book that Balázs Orbán has written, and I really commend it to you. And I particularly praise it because while this book, clearly as he's presented it and its intended audience is in many respects an audience for an audience of Hungary and Hungarians, intended to help guide it in the future of how it should see itself in the world and what its policy, its foreign policy should be. This book is of enormous benefit and should be embraced by readers from around the world, and I would say especially the United States. You just said something that I want to actually quite strenuously disagree with. You suggested that the elephant has nothing to learn from the mouse. I think this is actually quite opposite the case. The elephant tends to be, well, you know, we use the phrase the elephant in the room. The elephant is big. It doesn't see around itself very well. It destroys things, often without even intending to do so. The mouse has in some ways, it's not as high, not as mighty, but in some ways it has a good perspective. It can see things, it can move quickly, it can change its direction, and it doesn't destroy things when it turns around. It doesn't intentionally or unintentionally create havoc wherever it moves. I think this book is especially important for an American or a Western European audience in the following respect. Balázs lays out, it seems to me, two very recent paths that have especially been embraced by the United States. One of these he described as the sort of neoliberal globalist path, which imagined, building on Francis Fukuyama, imagined a world that would be completely homogenized, a world in which all distinction of nations and cultures would disappear. Effectively, there would be a borderless world, completely open, in which distinctions, national distinctions, cultural distinctions, religious distinctions would cease to exist. Everyone would speak English like tonight. It would be a world in which all differences would disappear, therefore all war, all conflict, all disagreement. We would simply be open, tolerant, trading, constantly more and more peaceful and more prosperous. Well, we see what the result in many ways has been. If we look over the last 30 years or so of neoliberalism, it's a time that we've seen our fair share of wars, and wars that have often been committed and undertaken by the elephant that would force or attempt to force other nations to become neoliberal or globalized. In the case of Iraq, in the case of Afghanistan, it would use its force, if people didn't agree to this globalized world, it would force them to become neoliberal. And we've also seen the consequences as they've come to exist domestically in places like the United States and Western Europe, which is the loss of the distinctiveness that made these civilizations worth defending, the loss of self-confidence, the loss of a kind of belief and understanding of what they are. This, I think, has clearly failed, but what Balázs describes is now its replacement with this bloc theory, in which you will either be a friend of America and Western Europe, or you will be designated an enemy. You will be inside the circle of friendship, or you will be outside the circle of friendship. And it seems to me this is just as perilous, and I think you quite aptly and correctly predict this is likely to bring on even more war and conflict in the world. And I think it does divide the world into a kind of a friend and enemy way of seeing other nations. Notice these two choices then, a world in which we eliminate difference, and a world defined by friends and enemies. Is there a better option? And I think the great thing about your book, the really marvelous aspect of this book, is to commend to the elephant and the smaller elephants in Western Europe that there is another option, which is not to view the world either as homogeneous, nor as friends and enemies, but as a place of cooperation with distinction, where nations can be nations and bring their distinctiveness and their unique histories and their unique traditions and customs and ways of life, their positions, their places, their locations, their geography, their various advantages, but not see each other either as a cause for homogeneity or a cause for mastery and conquest. So I think you actually have a lot to offer, not only the Hungarian readers, but I hope as well, and I will certainly be encouraging readers in my country to read and to learn from, if not the mouse, certainly the Hussar.
Well, I want to jump in on that and echo what you're saying, Patrick, that one of the great gifts of Hungary, I think, to the rest of us, to we Americans and the rest of Europe, is to stand in contradiction to this idea that's common in the elite class in the US and Europe, that we must be tolerant. Therefore, we can tolerate no difference at all. Hungary doesn't, as far as I can tell, doesn't expect Sweden and the Netherlands and Canada to adopt the same policies on the family, for example, or propaganda, sexual propaganda aimed at children. But Hungary wants to be left alone. And this is the true diversity, to be tolerant of differences, as opposed to what you see from Brussels and Washington, which is to crush any dissent. And I really don't understand why it is in our country, in our media, that Hungary is seen as the problem in that regard. I mean, yes, I know that Hungary, the example of Hungary violates the ruling class ideology, but it seems that once you get people here and they can see what it actually means to be Hungarian, they realize how much they've been lied to by our media.
As Balázs talks a lot in his book, warning about the dangers of decoupling or de-risking, in contemporary discourse, this usually means trying to untangle the various interconnectedness, economic, supply chain, etc. But also, there is, as you've all referred to just now, the danger of creating this us versus them, West versus East, or most popular these days, democracies versus authoritarian governments framework mentality. And this is alienating a lot of people, the rest of the world, global south especially, who take the view of we don't want to be forced to pick sides. So do you see a way of moderating this? Is there a way of perhaps ensuring connectivity can endure despite the pressures and impetus to take care of strategic concerns?
Yes, I would like to connect to what was said previously, touched by Rod and explained by Patrick, that Francis Fukuyama, and we are not quoting him because he is the most important figure, but he is a perfect figure to explain our argument. So this is why he is so famous, because it's so obvious that you can point to him and through that describe what the problem is. So when he was talking about end of history and the spread of liberal democracy, then after 20 years when he's seen the changes, he realized that it's not going to happen in that way he was described. And then he started writing books about why it didn't happen. And actually I think his best book is Political Decay, Political Order, when he is rethinking his original agenda. But what happened just recently, 2 years ago, he started to talk about that the end of history, it wasn't a false idea. It just didn't happen in that way he was wanting to describe it. But exactly as it was said by Patrick, that the end of history will arrive, we just have to win only one ultimate last big battle before the end of history, when democracies as the highest and the most valuable form of governing, and some other countries which are governed by autocrats are having an ultimate fight, a World War III, among each other. And democracies will obviously win that fight, and then the end of history will come. So your only choice and your only opportunity is to choose which side you want to take and how you want to get involved in the preparation of this ultimate conflict. Probably for an American or a Western ear, this is not so frightening, but for somebody who is living in a country which was under Soviet occupation and under Karl Marx influence for like 40 years, this is that, the heaven on earth will arrive. We just have to get prepared for a last ultimate fight before this arrives. So this is a Marxist way of seeing the world. It's formulated in a different way, but this is how we learned history and learned how we should think about the world order during the communist period of time. And immediately our censors are, like they're starting to react in a negative way and reject this way of understanding. And honestly, I think to differentiate the word like this, it's not going to work. And if it's not up to us. No one asked me, for example, in the United States or any other governments, what should be their strategy. So it's just my personal opinion. But it's also not a good strategy for the West to preserve its status, which has now, or getting back on track and having again the leader of the world order. This goes exactly the opposite direction. And the more this bloc formation logic with decoupling, de-risking, friendshoring, enemies of freedom and friends of freedom, the more it is pushed forward, it's actually just speeding up and catalyzing the decay of Western hegemony. And this is what we experience. This is what we experience in any conflict, in every conflict, in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, in the conflict during the World Trade Organizations, in the conflict on the Middle East, everywhere. Everything which happens us is an example that if you want to manage it from a foreign policy point of view, through the bloc formation logic, you are getting not stronger at the end of it, but weaker, and your influence are getting less and less relevant. So I hope that the next administration or a different administration, and also Europe, because it's a European issue as well, and the leadership of Europe will realize that this is not a good strategy for us. And I see that the only strategy is not the Hungarian way, but it's something similar, which is based on that, based on tolerating the idea of different nation states coming from different civilizational backgrounds, having different geographical advantages and disadvantages and priorities, having different type of connections towards the world order. And obviously, ideology, and especially liberal ideology, should be kicked out entirely by foreign policy discussions. And I think there is still a hope, because the West is not decided yet. I see that this is a trend, and now it's the mainstream. All think tankers or administration people are talking this language and writing the articles, but it can be reversed very quickly. And I think Europe, it's not decided yet. So inside Europe, even on a council level, so on the prime minister's level, but also in many powerhouses in European capitals, this debate is still going on. What role should Europe play? Join this bloc formation logic, or have an independent way of understanding? The French, who are much better diplomats than we Hungarians are, they call it strategic autonomy, which is, according to my understanding, is very similar on what I am talking about in this book. So I think the decision is not made. The strategy is not winning yet. It's under formulation now, and the debates are going on. And this is the reason why all conservatives, all national conservatives, all over the world should engage in that dialogue and not just focus on ideological terms, but getting involved in geopolitics. Because if we're not doing this, then the liberal mindset will blow up everything around us, and we will end up in a third world war, whether it's cold or hot. It's not a good perspective.
You know, Balázs, what you're talking about with the leadership class, liberal leadership class in the U.S. and in Brussels, forcing this choice, forcing you're either for us or against us, that's actually happening within the United States too, and it's helping tear my country, our country, apart. If you listen to the people in Washington, you're either for, quote, our democracy, or you're against it. You're a deplorable, you're a domestic terrorist. This is the way they talk about their fellow Americans. Meanwhile, if you look at the surveys of the confidence the American people have in their institutions, it's collapsing across the board. I'll give you one specific example that is hugely important geopolitically. The United States military is in a tremendous crisis of recruitment. It can't get enough soldiers to refill its ranks. There are several reasons for this. One of the most important ones, though, is the fact that the military has completely taken on the ideology of wokeness. It started under Obama, and it has spread throughout the ranks. And by wokeness, of course, I mean understanding that we need to fill positions on the basis of race, sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. This has had the effect of radically alienating many military families. In the U.S., there's a tradition of families who have military service across several generations. They provide a disproportionate number of recruits to the all-volunteer military. So many of these people have said no more. It's the forever wars of the 21st century and wokeness that have caused them to tell their children, it ends with with your generation. Don't go into the military. Don't serve this government. That's a pretty terrifying thing, but this is something that has been engineered by the leadership in Washington of both parties. The forever wars started under George W. Bush. So, and we can also look around and see that crime is exploding in American cities. There's so many problems throughout the country. And it goes back to the same thing that you're talking about, this you're for us or against us mentality that will not allow for true diversity, that will not allow for the discussion of problems, and the idea that maybe the solution to the real problems we have lies outside of the traditional rigid categories of left and right.
I think, just to underscore something that Rod was just saying, and I really want to emphasize this for this audience, and this is well known, I think, among many of you in Hungary, the very dynamics that we've been talking about that I think Hungary has been the subject to, being regarded as the incarnate of evil, in fact, called by a prominent historian just the other day a dictatorship, that you have here a dictatorship. That the dynamic that gives rise to this level of just outrageous and completely unhinged and inaccurate viewpoint toward this nation is, of course, also happening domestically. For those who do not hold what is now an ideology of what we might call wokeness or progressive liberalism, a kind of purified or extreme form of liberalism that demands fealty and agreement to basically, essentially, viewpoints that contradict every aspect of how we experience the world. That there are men and women, that men and women reproduce children, that only women can become pregnant, that families are the basis of every healthy society, that there are distinctions among nations, among people, among cultures, and that these can be the source of conflict, but can also and have always been the source of great insight, benefit, genius, distinction. If one does not hold these views that contradict reality, in my country you are held in the same view by the leadership class as Hungary is viewed by the leadership class. We are essentially, the walking Hungaries of our own country, Rod and I.
Yeah, that's true, and they can come down hard on you and cost you your job.
They can cost you your job.
Be cautious, because now the President of the United States is referred to Hungary as North Korea. So, same line. Yeah, so we
exactly,
are
I mean,
like North Korea.
I walk around the streets of Budapest, I feel like I'm in North Korea, the no electricity. And the reason that I want to underscore this fact is that I think your question was whether this can be moderated. I think, like every ideology, it has to be defeated. It can't be moderated. The ideology is so intensely held and believed, and if you don't believe it, you will be regarded as North Korea or a dictatorship or something. Or canceled. So it has to be defeated. And here's the problem right now, is that it is increasingly unpopular around the world and in our own nation. It has been, of course, shown to be unpopular in such votes as Brexit and in the growing opposition to the various woke agendas and political candidates that we see in the United States and elsewhere. Those who now control the institutions that have been the source and the purveyors of this viewpoint are attempting to do everything possible to prevent this defeat, and are doing so in the name of democracy in order to defeat democracy, in order to overturn electoral outcomes, or to rename democratic efforts to resist these ideologies as populism and not democracy. So I'm of the view that we will not see moderation until this ideology is defeated, and it will be defeated in some ways, as ideologies always are, as Hungary knows well, by the people rising up and defeating the ideology that is attempting to persuade them that something that is not real is something that they have to believe is real.
I would keep on, this fascinating conversation alive and asking questions, but the clock is giving me this, very angry look, indicating that it's time for the Q&A. So let's open it up to the audience. Is there microphones to pass around? If not, all right. No, that works. All right, so who has a question? The gentleman here, start off with.
Thank you very much. Nick Thorpe from the BBC. Balázs, thank you very much for the interesting discussion, and to all of you also for a very clear and interesting book. Congratulations on that. I would ask a very practical question. We're talking about big issues here, future of Christianity and so on. I'd like to ask you about battery production. Akkumulátor gyárok in Hungary, but how it relates to your book. You mention in the book that you would like Hungary to be a regional middle power. But in terms of battery production in Hungary, the government's also expressed a desire to become a superpower, even to overtake the United States. Isn't there a contradiction there? Couldn't there be an element of overreach? You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that the Hussar Cut is a bit risky, but I notice on page 10 of your book that it's at the same time it's a reckless enterprise, an initiative or action that risks everything. Is there a danger of overreach on Hungary's dependence on the German car industry, on Chinese and South Korean battery production, or on anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful and very important question, Nick. Actually, Nick Thorpe is, you moved to Hungary in '86, right? Is that correct? 86, that's the year when I was born. So, it's the same time when we lived together here in Hungary with Nick. So he is at least a half Hungarian. It's sometimes very critical towards the government, but knows the region and knows the Hungarians at least as much as I do. And the question in the EV industry is very important. From our point of view, it's related to the economic questions. Now it seems that the EV industry is a new type of industry. It's important. Everybody is. There is a global competition of investments, and we see it as a chance that Hungary can have a leading position in the EV industry. It's not about one particular country. It's not about one particular company. It's about technological merge and being a leading innovation. Now the car factories and the EV industry is very, very diverse. So China is involved, South Korea is involved, Germany is involved. In some elements, Japan is involved. In some elements, even the United States is involved. So according to our understanding, this is something which is an opportunity for Hungary, that being a leading country in this new type of economy. And from our perspective, what is important is again diversity, because diversity gives us maneuvering space and sovereignty. We don't want to lose car manufacturing capabilities. If there is a new industry, we're welcoming everybody, the Americans, the Chinese, the South Koreans, the Japanese, the Germans, to come to Hungary, merge technology here, build the factories here, bring the research centers here, and not only talking about cars, but about energy storage in households, in companies, for local communities, and so on and so on. So we see it as a breakthrough industry. This is not the only one, but probably this is where we are the most visible, or probably this is where the biggest competition is going on. But what we try to follow very closely on a governmental level is that keeping up the diversity. Where are the breakthrough points? It should not just be one, because then it means dependency, but it should be more than 2, 3, 4 industries: military industry, pharmaceutical industry, agricultural industry. So according to our understanding, these are at least as important breakthrough industries for Hungarian economy as the EV industry is. And it's about the level of FDI should be also balanced, as it is the energy. But now I just checked the figures yesterday. We're talking about the stock. We have 25 billion German FDI here in Hungary. We have 9 billion from United States, 9 billion from China, and 6 billion from South Korea. So this is important for us, and not important that we only have the American, or we only have the German, or we only have the Chinese. But what we follow very closely is how this balance will look like in upcoming 5 years' time. Whether we have maneuvering space, whether it's something happens, the EV industry is broken, then we still have to have a catalyzing force in the economy. Then the other industrial parts are breaking, because the Houthis are doing something at the Red Sea. 100% of the Hungarians have no idea where the Red Sea is, but it affects their job and affects their everyday life. So diversification of FDI is key. Identifying the breakthrough industries and inviting everybody from all over the world to settle in Hungary. This is what the connectivity strategy means from economic terms.
Right. Any other? Oh dear. Let's see. Let's collect questions. The lady up there, and then the gentleman over here.
Okay. Mr. Orbán, you gave a very colorful explanation. Oh, by the way, I write for Brussels Signal, Mary Ellen Synan. Why you called the book The Hussar Cut, and you described a battle where the battle could be turned upside down and won if the Hussar came in with a brilliant move and his enemy was left on the ground. But you didn't name the enemy. And I'm wondering if you could ignore the fact there's certain members of the diplomatic corps tonight and give me a name or two.
Yes, very good question. The enemy is progressive liberal ideology. It's not a country. It's a mindset.
So no individuals. There's no one particular person you would say, get rid of that one.
Individuals, I don't know, but definitely not countries.
Okay, thank you.
It's an ideology. It's a battle of ideas in my mind.
And the gentleman, which one? Sorry, who had a question over here? There we go. This may take a moment to get over there.
Hello, my name is Harry Gibbs. I'm a student at Corvinus University. My question is based on the name of the book Hussar Cut. Who are your hussars in this strategy?
Very good question, and I think Rod gave a wonderful answer to that question, because leadership, political leadership, is one point, but it's not about that we are smart enough to know what is best for country. So these governments can only operate and works because it's backed by the people. Every major decisions, even these civilizational issues, even these geopolitical issues, are backed by the vast majority of the population, overwhelming majority of the population. And it's not a party-related issue either. So many voters who do hate Fidesz and do hate me, myself, and the Prime Minister and everybody, they still think that what I just said in the field of, you know, peace and war and the Ukraine conflict and the sovereignty and the family issues, that's where they agree with us. And this is what gives us strength. So, and it's the most important thing. And if it disappears, if the society, if the individuals, if the families are turning away, they don't see this fight, they don't agree with our interpretations, they don't agree with us with the questions, what we are raising publicly for public debates, then we are lost. So it's not about leadership, it's about the society and the majority of the people backing you. This is what we try to keep a very close attention and try to focus on everyday decision making.
The gentleman up there.
Thank you. My name is Peter Szekér from Budapest Initiative for Peace in Ukraine. And I would like to have a question first of all to Mr. Carlos Roa and then a short follow-up question to Mr. Orbán. So you published an article in Hungarian Conservative around the end of 2022 about the prospect of Hungary becoming a keystone state, and you wrote, Hungary has the potential to act as a mediator between Washington, Brussels and Moscow. Doing so would be challenging, but the benefits of success would make Hungary the determinant player in European geopolitics. Do you still think this is the case? So this is a question for you. And for Mr. Orbán, I would like to ask if, do you think that the real Hussar Cut could be for Hungary trying to play a role in making the first step towards peace in Ukraine? Thank you.
That's a good question. I did not expect to be asked a question, so congratulations. I'm kind of blindsided a bit. I still think it is possible, but it would be very delicate and has to be managed just carefully. And in the spirit of the Hussar Cut, it needs to wait for the decisive moment for it to be done. You can't be too early or else certain parts will be very upset. Too late, and the major powers will already be in the process of setting out diplomats, raising signals, willingness to talk, etc. So it depends on the timing and the right initiative from the Hungarian government and other actors.
Actually, I agree with you, Carlos. So I think that now the task of the Hungarian diplomacy is to try to break the circle of escalation and try to broaden the narrative about this conflict, so inside the West, because the global narrative about the conflict is obvious. So the rest of the world thinks that it's a conflict which should be ended as soon as possible. So we don't have problems with the global South on that. We do have problems inside the West, and since Hungary is part of the West, now what we can do is to like creating a space for maneuvering and talking about peace, about restoring the communication, about discussing alternative strategies, about highlighting the fact that, since, the propaganda is telling us in 2 years that we are going to win, the Ukrainians are going to destroy the Russians, but the reality is different, and the Russians are thinking that the time is on their side, and it's probably that's going to be a big, if we continue like that way, it's going to turn this conflict into a hot conflict, a NATO-Russia conflict, or it will end up as a total humiliation of the Western powers. These are the two scenarios which we obviously all want to avoid, so probably should come up with an alternative. So this is, and we get all the hits for talking that way on a daily basis by in Brussels, in Washington, in many places. This is according to their understanding, not how it should be communicated about the war. So we get all the hits, we got all the punches, but what we still hold the line, and 80% and 90% of the Hungarian society, it's on our side. So at home we are in a quite convenient position, and we're waiting for the moment where we're trying to convince the actors to figure out something new. Until this moment, all our proposals and all our peacemaking efforts were rejected. But let's hope that one day it changes.
We have time for, I think, one more question, I'm sorry to say. The gentleman up there raised his, I saw it go first. I'm sorry to everybody else. There's a reception afterwards, so you have a chance.
Thank you very much. Michael Sommer, I'm an MCC fellow and professor of ancient history in Germany. No punch from me, but you mentioned the Houthis several times. And that raised the question in me, because that's a problem Hungary can't sort out because it has no navy. And so it has to rely on partners, and the only partners which are around are the European Union and NATO for that. And for that matter, maybe the Swedish. So don't these partners then deserve some kind of commitment on the part of Hungary when they sort this troublesome problem out for you? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very important question. And congratulations to you, Professor, because you are not punching us. You are really a tiny little minority in Germany, so it must have been very hard for you as well. But I think, so this is what we try to describe always, that this connectivity-based strategy, and this is why the liberal accusations on the other side that Hungary is not a loyal partner, Hungary is planning to leave, undermining NATO or leaving the European Union, or the usual accusations. This is ridiculous, because if you follow this presentation and follow the discussion what we had, it's obvious that all our connectivity strategy works if we are in the game, if we are part of this, because we are important for the rest of the world, is because we are Europeans as well, and we are members of the Western world. We are NATO members, we are members of the European Union. So we can have a voice there. So for us, in this situation, with this strategy, it's a vital interest to be a good NATO member and a good European Union member. And the question, I think, is what does it mean? And what are your responsibilities? And this is where the division line is getting more and more visible. So according to our understanding, just one example, a NATO is a common defense alliance structure. It means if any of the NATO members are attacked, then we have an international obligation, the most serious international obligation you can make on earth, that we have to bring our soldiers there and fight together, arms in arms, and protect that country. This is what NATO means, and this is what provides all of us security. And the other commitment we have to take is that we spend on our military. So we are not getting reliant only on others to defend ourselves, but we do our part. So actually this is what we Hungarians are committed for. We spend our money on our own defense. We are very thankful for our allies to come here if it's needed and help us to defend the country. And if they are under attack, we protect them. But full stop. This is it. Nothing more. Like, nothing, an formulation of attacking powers in the Indo-Pacific region or in the Middle East or something. This is not what NATO is about. Individual member states can form coalitions and go into these things. And now against Houthis in the Red Sea, there is a coalition of European armies. And even also the European Union is getting involved in financing the protection of its interest by the mean of military, not just in Ukraine, but elsewhere in the neighborhood. And Hungary is contributing in that part. Hungary is saying that in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, our interest is different. We don't want to fuel this conflict further, because the sooner it ends, the better for us. So this is why we are not participating. But there is no international obligation or EU law obligation to get involved in that. And the same in the European Union. Same in the European Union. We have policy areas where we share our sovereignty based on law. And this is where cooperation needs to be as smooth as it is possible. But in the decision making, obviously it should be about differences, because this is how you make decisions. And on those areas where we not allowed to have or shouldn't have joint efforts, then we shouldn't bypass the treaties. So foreign policy is something which is, according to my understanding, it's vital for my country and vital for small countries like Hungary. So obviously we will not give up voluntarily our independent foreign policy. But there is no requirement on the EU treaty side to give it up. If you want to do so, if everybody wants to do so, then we could go to that direction. But obviously it will not happen, because if a Hungarian government voluntarily giving up independent foreign policy, immediately the next day the rebellion will again here in the street of Pest. So in the upcoming 136 years, you will find no Hungarian governments giving up foreign policy sovereignty. This is what national conservatism and policies based on history and culture and civilization means. So differentiate and stick to the law, stick to the points where we have to have cooperation. There, be a loyal and productive partner, and on the other side, stick to your values and defend your interests.
And on that strong note, we have reached, unfortunately, the end of tonight's programming, but there is a reception. I know I'll be around for a while longer, so let's thank our panelists, Mr. Balázs Orbán, Ms. Patini, and Mr. Roger.